Well, thank you for the nice words and introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had time for lunch. We know we have a pressed agenda. It's great to be here in Barcelona in this new Iwater forum to discuss about a few things which are actually gaining traction more recently in the recent years, but which you did not listen so much about in water conferences a while ago. We are going to talk about finance. I have a couple of messages for you, but before I do that, I would like to say a few words about the OECD. As you may know, the OECD is an economic organization. We consider ourselves as a forum where governments meet to discuss about policies and how these policies can be improved. I work in the Environment Directorate, where my team works on a number of issues related to water quality management, water quantity management, and how to address scarcity issues. But also we've done a lot of work on financing, and I'd like to introduce you to some of the main messages that derive from our past work, but that also leads to new work. The message I would like to convey this afternoon is that we have a strong economic case to invest in water infrastructure and what we call water security. I'll go back to that in a minute. The problem is that the strong economic case does not translate into financial flows, and the financial flows that can contribute to water security remain low, meaning that they remain too low to achieve the ambitious policy targets that are being set at either national or global level. So we need to reflect on reflect on new ways to attract the available, the needed level of resource. And one point I would like to make is that water infrastructure may not be the answer. There may be other ways to finance investment that contribute to water security and sustainable growth, which may not be water specific. I'll come back to that in the course of the presentation. So the first point I would like to make is that we have a very strong economic case for investment in water security, and the point is that there are a number of water-related risks, and we are all aware about the report from the World Economic Forum last year, which ranked water as the most important global risks for business and communities. And with Oxford University, we have developed a report trying to assess what are the global costs of water insecurity, of lack of water security. And you can read on these slides that typically there are risks, there are costs related to risk of flooding. And typically, if you think about the risks, how flood risks affect urban water property, you have here the cost for the global economy. Similarly, you have risks that will affect irrigators. When water is scarce, irrigators will not have access to the water they need to grow their crops. That can also create risk and generate costs for the global economy. But more importantly, you also have costs associated to the lack of access to safe water and improved sanitation services globally. Altogether, these risks, as you can see, these costs actually amount to about $500 billion every year. That's not a minor figure. This is really daunting. And this only reflects some of the costs that can be monetized. There are also a number of costs related to environmental degradation, for instance, or biodiversity loss, which cannot be easily monetized and which are not factored in these figures. Second point I would like to make here is that these costs are global. The way water insecurity affects the economy is a global issue. Obviously, it affects developing countries, but it also affects developed economies. Developed and developing economies will be affected in different ways. On that chart, you can see the size of the pie. I hope I can find the pointer. Oops, sorry. Well, the size of the pie represents the costs for the national economy of water-related risks. Obviously, China and India lead the way here because of the sheer size of the population and the economy. The structure of the pie reflects the different categories of costs that are related to water-related risks. And typically in developing countries, you will see that the highest cost relates to lack of access to water supply and sanitation. We understand how lack of access generates risk for health and how that affects population and the economy. In developed countries, look at the US, for instance, you will see that the highest cost is not related to lack of access to water supply and sanitation, but rather it's costs related to flooding high-value assets. Obviously, as your economy grows, the value of asset at risk of flooding increases, hence this different allocation of costs when it comes to water-related risks. That chart may be difficult to read, but it conveys an important message, in my opinion, is that investment in water security actually contributes to growth. On that chart, and here I definitely need a pointer, otherwise you won't be able to read it. That axis synthesizes how the variability of water. And you have countries that will have very variable rainfall, very variable runoff, and in other countries, water runoff or rainfall will be more stable. The other axis here, the vertical one, this one, represents investment in water security. Actually, it's a proxy. It's essentially investment in water storage, but it's a good proxy to show how much money or how much effort have been invested by a particular country in protection against water-related risks. And all the little spots on the chart actually represent river basins. The green river basins, the green spots represent river basins which are well developed from an economic perspective, and the red ones represent river basins in developing countries. And you will see that the green spots are concentrated on the upper left part of the chart, meaning that the basins that have developed either benefit from a simple hydrology, from regular and stable runoff and rainfall, or they have invested in storage and they have invested in water security. And the red spots, so basins which have failed to develop, either are affected by a complex hydrology with high uncertainty about water availability, and at the same time they have failed to invest in water storage and water infrastructure. So there is an issue here. I think the graph helps to understand how investment in water storage and water security in general contributes to sustainable growth. The point is, as I said, that financial flows are not at scale. So we have a strong economic case to invest in water security. We now better understand that investment in water security actually is a development issue. It's not merely an environmental or water issue. It drives economic development and sustainable development in particular. Now, the financial flows are not at scale. There is already a huge amount of money being invested in water security, but we know that the global community has fallen short of achieving the MDGs that were related to water. And you know the numbers about the billions of people who don't have access to safe water supply, and the other billions of people who don't have access to improved sanitation. So there is really an issue of scale. So how to ensure that actually the financial resources that are available to invest in water security are at scale. And I will further develop three broad responses. One is how to make the best use of existing assets. We don't necessarily need to build more infrastructure everywhere. We could probably achieve improved level of water security by making a better use of the existing assets. In addition, there are issues about how to invest, how to identify the investment project that contributes most to water security and sustainable development. There is a risk that actually the investment project that attracts capital and investment may not be the ones which contribute most to water security and sustainable growth. Finally, obviously, we will need to attract additional sources of finance, and I will suggest a few ideas about how that can be done. But first point, how to make the best use of existing assets. I think this is a very important point, because before we can think about attracting additional investment, we have to make sure that we do the best with the assets which are already in place. First thing that can be done, and there are huge opportunities to improve performance here, is to increase the operational efficiency of water service providers. There are a number of utilities here in the room or in other places in that forum. They know what it is about. They have the knowledge, they have the capacity, and this creates huge opportunities to actually minimize investment needs. Asset management. I think we better understand now how improving maintenance, improving the operation of the existing assets can actually minimize investment needs. I used to work on a program in the former Soviet Union, and I was really impressed by the sheer amount of money that was invested in water infrastructure, but that had to be invested 5 or 10 years afterwards because of improper maintenance or operation of the system, which led to accelerated decay of infrastructure and a need to rebuild that infrastructure again. So asset management can really be a huge source of savings. It can really help postpone investment in additional infrastructure. There are new ways that water utilities can generate revenues that can contribute to better asset management and operational efficiency. One issue we have with current business models is that they're typically, and the revenues generated by water services are typically based on the volume of water sold. And that's somehow an issue because it can lead to, it can provide a perverse incentive to actually stimulate additional demand for water or sanitation that can run in contradiction with objectives to promote water conservation. So there are new business models that can be considered. I think there is a lot to learn here from the energy sector, which has learned how to generate revenues while promoting energy efficiency. In some of our work, we provide some illustration of business models that can, at the same time, contribute to stable revenue flows for utilities and at the same time contribute to water conservation. A very important area of development is to overcome barriers to innovation. There are huge opportunities to tap the innovation potential in the water sector, in the water industry. But that requires to overcome a number of barriers. Some of them may be technological, but I don't think these are the major ones. And if you walk around the booth here, you will see that there is a lot of innovation when it comes to water supply and sanitation. Some of the main barriers can be financial, as I said, because we may not have the right business models to operate, for instance, small-scale distributed water systems. But some of these barriers are also from a political or institutional nature. In my home country, France, for instance, water utilities are not allowed to use or to set in place distributed water systems that reuse water inside the building, whereas that kind of system actually adds value to homes and property in Australia. How come the French authorities don't trust the French plumber and their capacity to build a dual reticulation system in a house, whereas the Australian authorities trust their own plumbers. So there are issues here about a number of regulation and institutional framework that somehow capture the debate about alternative infrastructure and prevent the diffusion of innovation. Obviously, a major barrier here is the lack of appropriate framework in a number of countries, including developed economies, about water pricing and the capacity of water tariffs to generate revenues needed to invest in the operation and maintenance of the existing infrastructure. So the other set of response I wanted to discuss this afternoon is how to make sure that when we have money available to invest in water infrastructure or in water security, we select the most beneficial investment. There is always a risk that a lot of money will go to what we call these white elephants, you know, these big infrastructure projects which are very costly to build, very costly to operate, but which fail to deliver at scale because somehow there is a missing link in the puzzle that will prevent this huge investment from delivering. So obviously there are a number of issues to minimize, a number of options to minimize investment needs. One typically is to avoid building future liabilities. When we keep building urban development or cities in floodplains, we are creating additional risks that will generate investment needs in the future because you will have to protect this new urban development from flood risks. Think about an example I usually take about the development of road infrastructure in an urban context. The way these roads are built at the moment generate additional runoff because they are typically impervious surfaces. So typically when the rain falls, you will have rainwater runoff that are typically very dirty, very polluted water, and that runoff will have to be collected and treated. That generates additional costs. That will generate additional costs in the future, typically, especially when rainfalls become more stronger because of climate change. An alternative way about thinking about roads is to build roads that actually allow water to percolate through the ground and recharge aquifer. There are a number of benefits. First, it can minimize runoff because rainwater will actually percolate through the ground. And as I said, it also contributes to aquifer replenishment. So building that kind of road, building that kind of infrastructure is a way to avoid building future liabilities. There are a number of options to tap alternative water sources. When you think about preventing or mitigating water scarcity risks, the immediate response is augment supply. Build additional dams or reservoirs to augment supply. There are many different ways to use alternative sources of water that can come cheaper and with less pressure on the environment. Typically water reuse. You don't need to treat that water at a level that will allow it to be potable or to you can treat water, you can collect wastewater and treat it at a level, at a quality grade that will correspond to different water users. And in doing so, you can minimize investment need in water supply augmentation, and you can also minimize pressure on the environment. You can also exploit the potential of green infrastructure. As I said, there is an implicit bias in a number of institutions and policy framework in favor of grey concrete infrastructure, whereas green infrastructure, think about floodplains, wetlands, can actually contribute significantly to water security at least costs. There is a lot of work and literature around these issues. There is also a lot of innovative projects that are being implemented globally. The question is how to scale them up, how to make sure that they will diffuse and be implemented at scale. And here again, as I said, there are a number of misguiding policy incentives or misguiding institutional framework that prevent these investments of these projects to materialize at scale. Another way to identify the most beneficial investment needs is to consider investment as part of a system. The point I would like to make here is that if you really want an investment to deliver as much benefit as expected, you have to think about that investment as an element in a pathway, in a system of related investment. No investment alone can deliver at scale. It's really if you factor that investment into an investment trajectory or a series of investment, and if these different investments are planned in a strategic and coordinated way, that each of the building blocks will ultimately contribute to water security and sustainable growth. Finally, I would like to emphasize that investment in infrastructure is not the silver bullet. Infrastructure only develop when they are combined with appropriate institutional framework to make them operate, and if they also build on reliable and robust information. So when we speak about investment in water security, there is a tendency to focus on infrastructure. The point I would like to make here again is that investment in infrastructure have to come to and be planned together with investment in knowledge and information and investment in institutions. So finally, I'm not claiming that we don't need more finance to contribute to water security and sustainable growth. The previous slides were just here to say that increasing the volume of finance is not the only option. And indeed, you have to consider the other options that I have already mentioned before you can seriously consider increasing financial flows. One point I would like to make here is that it may make sense to shift from an investment in water infrastructure to an investment to water-wise investments. Take the example of a road in an urban context that I mentioned earlier. This road is not typically a water infrastructure, but it can contribute to water security. The question is it a transport infrastructure? It's still a road, but because it contributes to water security by limiting urban runoff and contributing to groundwater replenishment, it is also somehow a water infrastructure. So the category of investment does not matter so much. The point here is that a number of investments will materialize. Think about urban development, think about energy-related investment. These investments can contribute to water security, or as I said, they can alternatively generate future additional liabilities when it comes to water. So instead of focusing narrowly on water infrastructure, it may make sense to make a water case or make the case for investment in other sectors so that it factor in water security and they make water sense. There is a big institutional issue here because typically, again with the same example of my road, how to convince the department in charge of road construction and road operation that it needs to build road that can contribute to managing runoff. There is a challenge here, but I think it's an interesting area and an area where more work could be done, building the appropriate institutional framework, but also economic and financial incentives to somehow share the burden and make sure that investment that will materialize don't contribute to further liabilities, but actually contribute to water security and sustainable growth. So mainstreaming water in the portfolio. That's another way of framing it. But we know that this investment in urban development, investment in energy security will materialize. And these investments somehow find their way to private investors. If you look at the numbers, it's really amazing, stunning to see how renewable energy, typically, which was nowhere on the finance agenda 20 years ago, has now become a very solid set, class of assets, and has been able to generate huge volume of investment, and in particular of private investment. So the point here is how come that water has not managed to attract similar attention and similar level of investment from private investors. As I said, you can approach that in different ways. One is to try to convince investors, and private investors in particular, that they should put some of their money into water infrastructure. Another way of doing so is to make sure that some of the money they will put in other infrastructure contribute to water security. So that's what I mean by mainstreaming water in the portfolio of financing institutions. I'm always surprised when you talk to the financing community. When the finance community, when the water community talks to itself, it keeps preaching for more money, saying we need more money. We have a very strong economic case for water-related investment. Where is the money? When you talk to the finance community, they say there is plenty full of money around. Where are the projects? There is a mismatch here. There is a disconnect between the financing community and the water community. Obviously, they don't know how to talk to each other, and there are a number of missed opportunities here. So one way we at the OECD we try to approach that is by setting up what we call a roundtable on water finance. This is not a project that we want to implement on our own. This is a project that we are embarking on with the World Water Council, with the Netherlands, and with other partners. The point here is to set up a platform where the finance community and the water community will meet, share some lessons, develop some new analytical tools that will help the finance community design and prepare projects that are palatable from a finance community, but that can also help the finance community adjust some of the financing vehicles so that they can address financing needs in the water sector. Obviously, this is not something that can happen overnight. This is something that will require some time and several opportunities for both these communities to meet. These discussions have to be informed by robust analytical work to better understand why water-related investment don't materialize at the moment, or better understand how water security could be factored in other investments portfolio. That's why we think there is a need to set up that roundtable that will be here to stay. If it shows that it actually generates benefits, that roundtable may be here to stay for several years. The first meeting of the roundtable will be in April next year. So far, the feedback from the finance community has been very encouraging. We've managed to talk to pension funds. We've managed to talk to impact investors. We managed to talk to institutional investors, typically sovereign wealth funds, but also to typical commercial banks. So obviously, they are looking for opportunities to put their money at use in a project that will contribute to water security and sustainable growth. So with a little bit more effort and support, we think that roundtable can really deliver. Everything we do at the OECD is public, so you will find more information about the messages that I just conveyed into the two reports which are on that side of the slide. The one in the center, securing water, sustaining growth, I think was a landmark publication that really, for the first time, managed to put some figures on how investment in water security can actually contribute to sustainable growth. The Water Fit to Finance compiled a number of information about investment needs and financial sources that relate to finance. And the third one is actually a flyer, and you can have access on the OECD webpage about this roundtable on water finance that we are setting up with the World Water Council, the Netherlands, and other partners. So I'd be happy to continue that conversation either by email. Feel free to visit our website. And if there are financiers in the room who typically if there are financiers who want to know more about the roundtable we are setting up, I'd be happy to answer questions. I'll leave it here. I don't know if there is time for questions or an opportunity for Q&A. If not, anyway, I'll be in the room for the next hour or so. Thank you for your attention.